Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great 60 minutes lined up for you guys. A reminder before we do begin that today's session is being recorded and it will be made available on our community site very shortly after. The website is community.franchise.org. Today's session is the kickoff to our new labor and hiring series, which will continue through the end of the year. The first two sessions will deal with current employment issues and how to address employee concerns. And then we will transition into retaining and reactivating talent and then hiring new talent. Today's topic to kick us off is legal implications and implementations around returning to the workplace. We have two great speakers joining us today. Bruce Sarche, shareholder with Littler Mendelson and California coordinator and liaison for Littler's Workplace Policy Institute, will kick us off and walk us through current legal topics that we should all be aware of. And then we'll be joined by Carl Gocher, District Sales Manager for HR Services for Paycheck, who will come on and walk us through how to be aware of and implement such legal topics within your organization. I hope you guys are ready. And so I'm going to kick it off, Bruce. I'm going to kick it over to you to get us started.
Very good. Thank you, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. I am Bruce Sarche. I am an attorney and have been advising clients throughout the COVID-19 pandemic on how do we comply with all the new obligations which have sort of emanated from this. We've got cities passing regulations, we've got states, we got federal, we got courts making decisions, and compliance with all of these while trying to operate during a pandemic is a big challenge. And now it seems as though we're getting in the return to work phase, although a lot of big name companies have sort of hit the pause button on returning to work. But I think out there in the trenches in the average American workplace, a lot of people are coming back to the office. So we're going to talk about a few things and the legal implications here, the employment law implications. I am a lawyer, but I'm also a specialist in employment and labor law. So we'll talk about bringing workers back, vaccinations, face covering, cleaning, what happens if someone gets sick if you've called them back, and then the whole topic of working remotely. So employees have concerns, don't they, when you call them back to the office? You may say, hey, come on back to the office, and they say, well, wait a second, I think I'm more productive at home. What would you say to that? Well, I think there are some sort of canned talking points that you might come up with, basically saying, yeah, maybe you think you're more productive, but there's a benefit to being in the office too. There's pluses and minuses to everything. Some people might be less productive at home. So we're going to do this. We are returning to the office and we're going to maintain a safe and healthy workplace. But what if the employee says this? Oh, I don't want to come back to the office because I'm afraid I might catch it. I might get it, and I don't want that. Well, I think your talking points really have to focus in response to this, if you want to bring people back, on your safe and healthy workplace. This is what we're doing with cleaning. This is our ventilation plan, and so on and so on. What about if the employee says, I have children under 12, and I'm afraid that if I come back to the office, I might bring it home to them, and they can't get the vaccine. This one is really tough, my friends. I wish we had a better answer for this as a society. And for people who are out there not practicing safe behavior, remember there's children out there under 12 that can still catch this and don't have the ability to get a vaccine. So this is a little more challenging. But again, I think you just say, we're coming back to the office. If this is the decision you've made, I think you need to sort of stand behind it and say, we have a safe and healthy workplace. Just like we said when the employee said, I was afraid I might catch it. We say the same thing when the employee says, I might catch it and give it to my under 12 age children. Now it gets a little more difficult though, because how about this one? My doctor says I can't get the vaccine. What do you do with that? Well, what we have now is we're in the world of the Americans with Disabilities Act and any state anti-employment discrimination laws that provide that protected status includes a disability. So you have to engage then in the interactive process with these folks and talk to them about whether or not there's a reasonable accommodation that would allow them to perform the essential functions of their job. Now, if they've been working at home for 6 months, for 12 months, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to say, oh, and now it's an undue hardship for you to come back to the office. So this one here is not an easy one. If someone says, I can't get the vaccine because of a medical condition, but it gets even more challenging. How about this one? I have a sincerely held religious belief that says I should not get the vaccine. What do you do with that? Well, you can't discriminate on the basis of disability. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion. So again, you have to go through that interactive process to determine whether or not there's a reasonable accommodation that would allow them to still do their job. And once again, if they've been working from home, that might be that reasonable accommodation. So that's a little bit on the dialogue that can take place when you are returning to the office. Let's talk a little bit more specifically now about what's been in the news all over the place, vaccinations and face coverings. Here we're at the water cooler. We've got two employees talking to each other, and one says to the other, look, why don't you get the vaccine? It's because of people like you that I have to put this stupid face mask on back. I was free from May 13th to July 27th when the CDC said fully vaccinated people don't need to wear face coverings, but people like you didn't get the vaccine, so now I've got to wear this thing. And the employee who doesn't get the vaccine comes back and says, hey, none of your business. I don't want to get it, so that's too bad. Ladies and gentlemen, this kind of conversation is happening in American workforces, and it's uncomfortable. We're sort of divided on this issue, and that division is going to show up in our workplaces. So I think the sort of rational and reasonable approach to this is to say, look, we've got a policy that basically says we're not going to talk about this. We're going to focus on work. So let's not have dialogue back and forth about whether someone is or someone isn't vaccinated. We're all committed to having a safe workplace. And if we're there talking about these other things, that's going to distract us from our mission. Now, we have Zoom calls. We're on one now, right? In July and in August, these were the top two things we surveyed. Number one thing, you're on mute, right? Everyone always says that at least a few times in a Zoom call. But this was number two, mandatory vaccination. We want to mandate that our employees get the vaccination. Can we do that? Well, a number of businesses are doing it. And with the approval just a couple days ago, full approval, removal of the EUA, emergency use authorization for the Pfizer vaccine, we're seeing it gaining more and more and more momentum. Indeed.com just came out today and said that 90% jump in the number of job postings requiring vaccination as a condition of employment. So if you are thinking of this, I think right now there are basically three options: an immediate requirement, a phased in requirement, and then this sort of soft landing approach: get vaccinated or test weekly. Immediately, well, you just say you're going to do it immediately. But remember, as I've mentioned, you're going to have exceptions for medical conditions and for religion. And if you have a mandatory vaccination policy, you better be ready to enforce it. That means if someone comes to you and says, I just don't want to do it because I don't want to do it, you better be ready to let them go. You got to enforce your work rules consistently with a good documentary record. Two more points on this: make sure it's documented and make sure it's documented. Number two, a phase in. How about this? Hired next month or after, new hires need to be fully vaccinated and current staff fully vaccinated by January. This approach has some appeal, doesn't it? Because by January, I think things will be maybe even a little more different. Maybe we'll have some people with booster shots. The other two vaccines, Moderna and J&J, could have their EUA status lifted as well. And for new hires, well, it's just the way it is for them. And of course, once again, exceptions for medical conditions and sincerely held religious beliefs. And then the soft landing approach: you say mandatory vaccination, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. You just have to get a COVID test every week. And of course, with the exceptions. There's some problems with this approach. Number one is there's a lot of time taken to get these tests. It doesn't just happen, it takes time. And other problems, it costs money. You might have to pay workers to take the test and for their travel time and so on. And that's probably a conservative and smart thing to do. You have to figure out the logistics, when, where, how are they going to report it back? And after that, you could come up with a lot of positive tests. So you've got people being excluded from your workforce. So this option of mandatory vaccination or testing weekly, maybe there's some pitfalls there that need to be considered. Now, what do you do with vaccination status? If you ask people if they've been vaccinated, um, you can have them not wear masks in low or moderate transmission areas, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. You can impose a workplace rule requiring mandatory vaccination, but not in Montana. If you're in Montana, vaccination status is a protected category there, the only state that has gone to that. You also can withhold things like travel. Don't travel unless you've got a vaccine. So what about face coverings? That's a lot about vaccines. Remember, and I mentioned this before, on May 13th, the CDC came out with this blockbuster announcement. Hey, if you are vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask everywhere. And then people are, yay, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. That's great. Well, that lasted 10 weeks, didn't it? 10 weeks later, the CDC says, wait a second, even if you're vaccinated, you need to wear a mask indoors if you're in one of these areas of substantial or high transmission. And they've got a guidance for what that is, and they post a map every night. And here's what that map looked like at the end of June. The blue is good. The yellow is a little worse, orange is not good, and red is bad, all right? So that's the end of June. Watch what happens over the next month. Oh, that's not looking good. And by the beginning of August, it's pretty much red, isn't it? So the ability to not wear a mask under the CDC recommendation in these areas of lower transmission is pretty much gone. It's pretty much gone. So let's go to the cubicles now, and we're enforcing our mask policy because we're in one of these areas of high transmission, or we're in the San Francisco Bay Area or the city of Los Angeles or Yolo County, California, or the state of Louisiana or New Mexico where they have mask mandates, and you warning the person, and the employee says, what's going to happen to me next time? Well, remember the slide we had just a little earlier. If you've got a work rule, like wear your mask, you better be ready to enforce it consistently and document, document, document. Does this mean that American businesses need to have people that are the face mask police? Answer, yes, it does. Yes, it does. All right, what about cleaning of the office? That's still a thing. In the early days of the pandemic, of course, we had people going to the grocery store and coming home and then wiping down all of their groceries before they brought them into the house and changing clothes in the garage and putting them in a bag because they were afraid that the coronavirus could attach to clothing and physical objects. And we now know that that's not as important. Really, the key is covering your nose and mouth properly. That's the real key to stopping it. But cleaning protocols have not gone away. And just a few words on these. You may still have local health ordinances and orders requiring certain cleaning protocols. And I think there's a degree of comfort, isn't there, that people get when they know that something has been subjected to cleaning protocols. I have done a little bit of traveling recently, and the rental car that I was able to get after a long line, because there's hard to get rental cars these days, had a little sticker across it, but want to break the seal sort of when you open it up, indicating it had been cleaned. And I drove to my hotel and there was a little seal across the door there as well, indicating that it had been cleaned. You've got to have a documented procedure, let the employees know about it, check for compliance, and make sure that you're updating the cleaning protocols on a periodic basis. What about an employee who you've returned to the office now and the employee is exposed or they test positive? Well, you really are, we're still in the place where we want to exclude individuals and instruct them to self-isolate. My computer, I apologize, seems to be having an interesting little time here jumping around. Apologize for that. Well, it wants to show you that map again. They've experienced COVID-19, they've had a close contact, test positive, or diagnosed. We still need to remove them from the workplace. Another, going back to that soft landing idea we were talking about, you could end up with a lot of positive tests. And then what about bringing them back? Generally, we want to look at a symptom or time-based strategy rather than a test evidence-based strategy. This is sort of big picture thinking here, my friends, but putting it in that context is what we're advising most clients to do today. Is when are the symptoms going away, not what is the testing, and that is the key to returning to the office. Really shouldn't come back if you're experiencing symptoms. At least 10 days have passed and 24 hours without fever, without the use of Tylenol, Advil, etc., and other symptoms have improved. There's a lot of detail on some of these slides, I know, and as Caitlin mentioned, the slides will be available after the presentation. And then infected and potentially infected employees who don't experience symptoms still should be excluded from the workplace until at least 10 days have passed since that first positive test. And if you've had close contact and never developed symptoms and are not tested, again, not coming back for 14 days. But with, of course, the famous lawyers' disclaimers that you should check the local rules and regulations to make sure that you're in full compliance. A little bit of a plug here for our website at my law firm, Littler, littler.com. We update on a regular basis 3 publications about face mask duties, about vaccinations, and about these return to work protocols. So you can check it out there under the COVID-19 resources tab. And of course, we've got an avalanche of new leave of absence laws that have been passed in the wake of the pandemic. As I said earlier, operating during a pandemic is not easy, and now you've got to comply with all these new laws. We've got tons and tons of cities that are just putting into place all sorts of new leave laws. Compliance is more and more challenging. If you're thinking of reducing your allocations in your human resources department, think again. It's more complicated than it was just 3 months ago and way more complicated than it was 12 months ago. We need more resources in human resources, not fewer. Finally, let's talk a little bit about working from home, telecommuting, the questions that telecommuters ask. How do I clock in? Who's going to pay my electric bill now that I'm working from home? What happens if I fall down at home? And what about the confidential and trade secret information that I've got? And here's the other one, like I said at the very first slide here, I'm more productive at home. Can I keep doing this forever? Some people really like the freedom of not having to have the boss watch them all the time while they are working. And if you got exempt employees, those that get a salary, it's sort of one thing. Non-exempt employees, it's a little bit more tricky. And I've come up with a list of the 10 things that non-exempt employees working from home need to do every day. Number 1, do not work until you clock in. Number 2, clock in. Number 3, take your morning break. Don't clock out or back in. Sorry, there's a little typo there. I'll fix that. Clock out for lunch. Clock back in after lunch. Number 6, take your afternoon break. Number 7, get permission before working overtime. Number 8, clock out. Number 9, don't do any work after you clock out. And number 10, maybe an afterthought here with all this clocking in and out. In between all that clocking in and out, make sure that you actually do your job. So you can see by this display, it's a little complicated when you've got non-exempt employees working from home. What about those salaried employees? Well, we don't care if you clock in or out, just get the job done. But outside salespeople may lose the exemption if they're working from home. If you have outside sales, contact me a little later on. You'll have my email address and we can talk about some of the nuances there. Big concern is expense reimbursement. As I mentioned, who pays my electric bill? And we've got wage and hour class action litigation pending in various places across the country from employees working from home saying, I need reimbursement for these expenses. And also for non-exempt, expense reimbursement is a real thing. Other considerations of the home office, safety, postings, et cetera, et cetera. But wait a second, it gets more difficult. You can actually play three-dimensional chess here. Remember from the early Star Trek, Spock and Captain Kirk would play three-dimensional chess. They never really explained the rules of it, and it seemed always that Kirk won. But it was a very complicated game, I'm sure. And this is a complicated game too, because you've got employees working from home, but their home is in a different city from their office or a different state. Or we even have this, they're working in a different country. What about a different planet? Well, we don't know about that today, but maybe, just maybe, your granddaughter's granddaughter will have to consider the interplanetary aspects of remote work. So which law applies? Say someone's office is in Sacramento, but they're staying with their mom in San Diego. Generally, the law where the worker sits is the one that applies. Even if they sneak away in the middle of the night and don't tell anyone, that still applies. With this warning, some leave of absence laws require that accrual take place regardless of where the employee is, and the accrual is based on the city of the office. So what do you do about this? I think you need to find out where your people are if they're working remotely, and you can have policies that basically say you can't just go anywhere and then tell us. You have to tell us first, because we have to be set up and licensed to do business in that state which you travel to. Now, some businesses are embracing flexibility. It's difficult to get qualified workers today. We have a real labor shortage. And one option of a possible benefit is to say, hey, you can work remotely here. And maybe we should focus on where people can work rather than on where they can't. So that's a quick summary of 5 concepts about return to work. They are a host of legal and labor and employment law challenges that businesses face in this area. And I'll turn it over now to our next speaker. I'm trying to stop sharing here. And I think I did. Carl, are we ready to do the handoff now? We'll take questions at the end after Carl's presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Bruce. Carl, you should be able to start sharing your screen now. While he is doing that, Bruce, thank you so much for that. And yes, as Bruce said, we will take questions at the end. So please keep adding them to the questions box, and both Bruce and Carl will come back on the end to address those. So for those who were not here at the beginning, Carl is a district sales manager of HR services for Paychex. Paychex is also an IFA preferred vendor, so we're very excited to have them here. So Carl, I'll hand it over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And just a tremendous presentation, Bruce. Thank you very much for that. I spend all my time with my team and others talking about many of these very same issues. And I think some of what I have to share is going to sound maybe a little repetitive, but I'm going to come at it from a slightly different perspective. We are the largest HR outsourcing company in America and very closely related to the IFA groups. So my information and my perspective really comes from working with our clients. And Bruce said it exactly right. HR has grown in its relevance and importance and really its need for small to medium-sized business owners over the last few years. Just as a quick example of what I mean by that, Paychex is the #1 supplier of legally reviewed employee handbooks across the country. We do some 150, 160 new ones a day. And 5 years ago, on a national average, thanks to legislative changes, we would have to update these handbooks 5 to 6 times a year, which we thought was a pretty good workload already, every couple of months having a new change. Well, I live just outside of Dallas here in Frisco, Texas, and last year we had 20 updates in the state of Texas, 18 federal updates. And that was occurred before the pandemic hit. So I couldn't agree more, Bruce, that now is not the time to reduce your reliance and investment in HR service, in HR professionals. More than ever now, we need to pay very close attention that we're staying compliant. The liability is too great for a business owner who's invested all their time and money to grow a business. So let's dive in and talk about what that looks like. And we really started this notion of how do we manage this vaccination rollout, right, from a business owner standpoint into return to work. And now we're sort of in the middle of return to work and managing vaccinations and booster shots yet again. So it's a little push-pull. So here's what our clients are telling us. 1 in 4 business leaders that we're meeting with are wondering how to determine exactly what role their company should be playing in COVID-19 vaccinations and in managing that process from an employee or personnel perspective. 1 in 3 business leaders are saying that we very definitely need more information and recommendations from HR professionals specifically on COVID-19 related issues, right? Again, just echoing what Bruce has already shared, that we need to understand what the advice is. It's very complicated, not just by state by state, but also municipalities, certain areas of the state, right? You're going to have a different conversation in the Dallas-Fort Worth area than you are in Houston. We've also uncovered in our survey with our business owners that nearly 60% of business owners say that they expect that they're going to have to make a very significant investment in time, money, and technology to monitor that employee COVID-19 vaccination status and return to work process. So it is not just a matter of compliance. It's going to take real resources for business owners to open business back up, get returned to work, and continue to manage this brave new world we live in today. So let's go through some of the questions that came up in our survey, and they may very well be the same kinds of questions that you're wanting to ask or already considering asking right now. Why should we have a written policy, right? It's not uncommon I talk to a business owner that says, I don't want to paint myself in a corner by putting it down in writing. That could not be more opposite of what's necessary. By having a documented, clear COVID-19 vaccination policy, it's going to help your employees understand what your expectations as the business owner and manager are regarding that vaccination, as well as whatever processes or requirements are associated with it. For example, at Paychex, there's a return to work going on in different parts of the country where it's possible. Dallas office, for example, is not ready to go. Phoenix office is. Well, in order for our employees to go there and not have to wear a mask and not have to honor social distancing, they have to provide on file a copy of their vaccination proof. And if it's not loaded into our system, then they're expected to wear that. So having to develop those policies, we are an HR outsourcing company. It took months to get to the right place where we need to get to, and now we have to manage that. So by putting it in writing, you make it very clear what those expectations are. It makes it much more easy, and not much more easy. It makes it possible to hold people accountable to what those expectations are. If they're not in writing, it becomes very, very difficult. The other thing Gallup taught us in a poll a few years ago is that anytime we can put it in writing, put that legally reviewed employee handbook or that policy in writing, we're going to see that it actually has a positive impact, increasing employee engagement. People aren't wondering what the expectations are. As an employer, am I allowed to mandate that my employees be vaccinated against COVID-19? I thought Bruce presented beautifully on exactly what that is, but it essentially says the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, allows employers to establish that qualification standard that essentially prevents an individual from posing a direct threat to the health or safety of others in the workplace. That's the very basis for why we're able to mandate that vaccination. But as he pointed out, there could be any number of reasons that as employers we have to honor for why someone would not take a vaccination. For example, my wife's coworker just had a baby. At the beginning of her pregnancy, in the first several months, she was told not to get a vaccination. And it was only recently that medical professionals decided that, yes, a pregnant woman would benefit from that vaccine as well. So we're in a constantly changing environment. It could be about a medical condition, a personal belief, what have you. So before taking any action against an employee who indicates they can't be vaccinated, employers are going to have to work with each and every employee to determine whether or how they can be reasonably accommodated if they can't meet that policy. So it really becomes very much an employee-by-employee, case-by-case situation. And because it's incredibly complex, employers are going to want to consider encouraging rather than requiring employees to be vaccinated. And we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about how employers are incentivizing and trying to motivate their employees to do it rather than mandate it. as an employer, if I implement, oops, that did not change. Let me get my own slide fixed here. For whatever reason, it is not showing the slide. There we go. So if I implement a mandatory vaccine policy, what can I do if I'm unable to accommodate an unvaccinated employee? If an employee does refuse or is unable to be vaccinated because of a medical condition or religious belief, etc., you really start to open a world of liability as a business owner. It's going to be important at that point to make sure that you have expert legal counsel to determine exactly what those next steps are, and do that prior to actually acting against that employee, right? There seems to be a great deal of urgency in the marketplace right now that if we find somebody in violation, it seems very urgent, right? Just like it did in the early days of the pandemic, that this person poses an immediate threat, I need to act now. The repercussions for acting hastily or in an ill-advised manner can make it a moot point for how you're managing the policy. You may be just struggling to keep the doors open. Make sure you're getting that legal advice. What strategies are businesses considering to encourage their employees to be vaccinated? Like I said, oftentimes what we're seeing is that a business owner is reluctant to mandate it because of the complexities of that compliance and because of the workload it actually puts on the business to mandate the thing. So we're seeing a lot of businesses actually just providing incentives. All right, let's get everybody to want to go take the vaccine. And here's some that were the most common in the survey that we've seen were companies between 2 and 500 employees. Now, this is a little older, right, when the vaccination was starting to roll out, but we've seen it pretty much stay along these lines over the last several months. Top of the most commonly used incentives is to provide paid leave for vaccinated people during the work hours. They're simply educating people about the vaccine. That can be highly motivational as well. Celebrate and acknowledge, recognize employees who are getting the vaccine, a simple bonus or a gift card or other kind of payment, just flat out paying somebody to get the vaccine. And then if there are costs associated with it and we're encouraging our employees to get it or even requiring them, then we probably need to be thinking about offsetting the expense that is going to be to the employees. 3 ways that we saw folks, and we thought it might be pertinent given what we're seeing with the resurgent, and the map that Bruce shared from the difference between the start of June and the start of July and start of August was a little alarming, but it's exactly what we're seeing in the news. So we thought this was pertinent because we went to our client base, this is probably January, February timeframe again, and just talked about how are we helping manage from an employer perspective what that vaccination rollout looks like. And there were 3 key areas that business owners were focusing on. First of all, is just providing consistent, reliable communication, keeping employees informed about the developments that are coming out, and not leaving it to people to find their news source from the internet or Facebook or whatever TV show they happen to be watching. There's just a lot of information out there. So the idea of making sure that they're educated as to what's actual, what's real, what's happening is a key part of managing that vaccination program. It's recommended that as part of your policy, you actually designate an internal direct person to be that liaison, to field questions about the policy and point employees to those trusted resources they're going to be able to use themselves. Email or newsletters is pretty common. In-person meetings, we've done all of that at Paychex, as well as phone and video conferencing, internal chat, a helpline, blog, or website. We've done all of that as a company, and we've seen a number of small to medium-sized businesses doing the exact same things. This problem really doesn't discriminate between a company that has 2 employees, 20 employees, or 2,000 employees. The second thing that they're doing is actually tracking that employee COVID-19 vaccination information. We actually have a health portal at Paychex that we're requiring employees who are vaccinated who want to be in the office to upload that vaccination card or proof into the system so that we have it. 82% of the businesses that we surveyed already were or were planning to monitor that employee vaccination. And as you can imagine, it's very important. Paychex is at its core a sales organization, meaning we're constantly dealing with the public, often at their places of business. The liability that would be associated with us sending somebody into that environment, putting our clients or prospects at risk without being able to validate and monitor that we're in fact making every effort not to do that, would create a great deal of liability for us as a company. We're absolutely not going to put our clients in harm's way, and we're certainly not going to take that risk as a business owner either. And then finally, providing digital alternatives. And we continue to hear more and more about this. Flexible work options. It is the age of the mass resignation. People are making a change in their career now more than ever because they're untethered. So many people are looking to stay working from home. So the idea of creating an ability for people to use digital methods to provide a safe and productive return to the workplace, even in a phased or measured approach, is very key on the minds of business owners these days. Finding secure ways to answer employee HR questions virtually. That's a new challenge we hadn't had to consider before. Digital employee management tools, online time and attendance tracking, online access to documents like handbooks and safety protocols. All those things that we would typically expect to happen inside the office or face-to-face or come by and see me kind of things, oftentimes we're having to come up with a different alternative. We see DocuSign being used for acknowledgments we never even had to have signed before, but now because our clients aren't with us, that's where we're at. And of course, online employee access to HR records. If you're used to going to the file cabinet for whatever you need, it's probably been a while since you've seen it. My own personal experience, I'm sure many of you are sharing, I was able to go back into the office last week to collect some belongings. It was 522 days since the last time I've been in that office, and I used that office for the 5 years previous to that. It looked like I had just been there the day before, not a single thing changed. And that's confronting the stark reality of the changes the pandemic has made for us. It was really startling to recognize that perspective of change in time. We don't get to see it every day sitting in our home office, looking at the same wall every day. So digital access is important and making sure we're staying connected to our people as well. Now, this is, just as Bruce pointed out perfectly, such a different world, right? Depending on state to state, area to area, even county to county or city to city. And oftentimes we speak in general terms. One of the things that we have, IFA members have access to is that consultation with Paychex. If there's something really going on and you'd like to have some expert advice or insight into it, we can make ourselves available. We have additional resources that you can click on, and you can certainly reach out to Paychex to have that conversation as well. Caitlin, I think that's at the end of it. I'm wondering if we don't see that there's going to be a lot of questions for Bruce.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Carl. All right, Bruce. What are the rules requiring vaccines and masks for 1099 or subcontractors? 1099/subcontractors.
Yeah, great question. And let's talk about vaccines first. You can require that people entering your premises, whether they're your employees or a vendor, the person that's coming to deliver a package or to repair your photocopy machine or to put up a new sign, that everybody that enters your doors be vaccinated. And you can work with the people who are selling you the services to make sure that they're sending you only people who are vaccinated. Perfectly legal, and we're seeing it all over the place. Hospitals, acute care hospitals, seem to be leading the way here. And I'm working with a couple of clients who have individuals that go into hospitals to do various things, to explain how medications work, to explain how medical devices work, and so on. And what we've seen in just the last 3 or 4.
This is Olivia from Apple Support. We have found some suspicious activities in your iCloud account, that your iCloud account has been breached. Before
Sorry
using
about that.
any Apple device, please contact Apple Support Advisor. Press 1 to connect with
Are
Apple Support
requiring
Advisor.
anyone that
Press
comes
2
to the
to listen
hospital
to this message
do these
again.
kind of services,
Or if
to
you wish to
discuss the new
contact us
medication
later,
or the
please
medical
call us
device.
on our toll-free number,
You guys,
315-232-8257. Thank you.
masking. You can have a masking requirement pretty much anywhere in the country that says if you come in our building, then you have to have a face covering. And I think it's smart business practice today. You don't want to be traced back as the center of one of these outbreaks. And is it uncomfortable? Is it a pain? Are people tired of wearing face coverings? Yeah, some people are, but other people are understanding and want to be safe. I remember maybe 4 months ago, there was an article about one of these retail clerks after the May 13th announcement from CDC that fully vaccinated people no longer needed to wear a face covering or social distance. And this retail clerk was saying, that's nuts, man. I don't want to get COVID. I want people to wear masks when they come into my store and I'm working with them. So it's not always the case that everybody thinks that masks are such an uncomfortable inconvenience. A lot of folks support them. So again, as I mentioned, there's some divisions in our country out there about both of these issues, but great question.
And then the last one we have, and I believe this is for you, Bruce, should we consider paying home expenses for employees working remotely?
Sorry, Caitlin, I had to turn off the sound because I was getting that weird message over my.
That's okay.
But so I didn't get that question. I just turned it back on again.
Okay, should we consider paying home expenses for employees working remotely?
Answer, yes. None of you should consider it, but in a lot of states, it's going to be required. It's a state by state question, but here in California, for example, it's a necessary, if it's necessary for them to do their job, then yeah, expense reimbursement is required. We've also got this case on cell phones where you have to reimburse if someone's using, in California, their personal cell phone for business purposes. You have to figure out a way to reimburse them for that. It's sort of entertaining to read the court's decision because you get the feeling that the judge can't. He's just like everybody else. He can't read a cell phone bill. Who can read their cell phone bill? Nobody. But he says, figure it out. You have to reimburse them for it. So yeah, home office expenses. I think we need to look at reimbursement, especially in states like California that have a mandate for that.
Well, that is all the questions we have. Bruce, Carl, thank you both so much for your time today. This was really great information. I know I learned something, so I'm sure everyone else who attended did. Thank you also to both Littler and our IFA preferred vendor Paychex for not only their time today, but also for the constant support of IFA and our franchise community. So we really, truly can't thank you all enough. And then to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for investing in yourselves and your education through IFA and for the franchise community. Please make sure to check out the recording of today's webinar along with the PowerPoint session, or PowerPoint PDFs on community.franchise.org. And as well on our community site, you'll find information on all the remaining webinars in this labor and hiring series. The next one is on September 8th, and we will tackle the topic, preparing for return to work, addressing employee concerns, dealing sort of with childcare, after school care, and also in terms of office and workplace cleaning. So again, Bruce, Carl, Paychex, Littler, thank you all so much. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you.